I never thought I'd be telling my story like this, but maybe putting it into words will help me make sense of it all. My name is Natalie, and until recently, I thought I had a family that cared about me. Turns out, I was just a backup plan, a safety net they expected to fall into place the moment things got tough. I grew up in a small town where everybody knew everybody. My parents, Richard and Olivia, owned a family bakery that had been around for decades. It wasn't fancy, but it was a staple. In the community, people came not just for the pastries, but for the nostalgia, the tradition. My parents poured everything into it. Early mornings, late nights, no vacations. To them, the bakery wasn't just a business, it was our legacy. From the time I could walk, I was expected to help. I bagged bread, wiped counters, took orders, all while balancing school and later, college. It was just how things were. But while I worked, my younger sister, Samantha, did nothing. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If she so much as cleaned her room, my parents would act like she'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, I could be juggling 3 things at once, and it still wouldn't be enough. I never wanted to take over the bakery. I respected it, sure, but my dreams were different. I wanted an education, a career I chose for myself, and for a while, I thought I was on my way to achieving that. I was in my 2nd year of college, studying hard, working a part-time job to cover expenses, and finally starting to build a future outside of my family's expectations. Then, one weekend, I went home for a visit and everything changed. When I walked through the door, the air felt different. My parents were waiting for me in the living room, sitting with this heavy, serious energy, like they were about to deliver life-altering news. Samantha was off to the side, scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention. My mother was the first to speak, her voice unnervingly firm. "Natalie, your father and I have been talking. The bakery needs you. We need you. It's time for you to step up and take your place in the family business." I blinked, thinking I had misheard. Step up? My place? My father leaned forward, his expression grave. "We want you to drop out of college. The bakery can't survive without you." And just like that, my world shifted. At first, I thought they were joking. Drop out of college? Abandon everything I'd worked for? Sacrifice my future to run the bakery? Something I never wanted in the first place? It was absurd. But the way my parents sat there completely serious made my stomach twist. "You can't be serious," I said, forcing out a laugh that died the second I saw my father's face. "We're completely serious," he replied. "Your mother and I are exhausted. We can't do this alone anymore, and we can't afford to hire extra help. We need someone we trust. We need you." Samantha didn't even look up from her phone. She was barely listening, because she already knew none of this would ever fall on her. It never did. I looked between my parents, trying to process their words. "And what about her?" I gestured towards Samantha. "Why can't she help?" My mother sighed as if I had just asked the dumbest question in the world. "She's not ready for that kind of responsibility," I scoffed. "She's only 2 years younger than me. She needs time to figure things out," my father added. "But you're reliable, responsible. We can count on you." There it was. The same expectation that had always been there, dressed up in different words. They weren't asking me for help. They were demanding my future. I turned to Samantha, hoping just maybe she'd have the decency to look guilty. Instead, she smirked. "I'm not really cut out for the bakery life," she said lazily. "I have bigger plans." I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. She gets to have bigger plans, but I don't? I turned back to my parents. "You're asking me to throw away my education, my career, my entire life, because you don't want to make her work?" My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't about fairness, Natalie. It's about family. The bakery is our legacy. Without it, we have nothing." My hands clenched into fists. "Then hire someone." My mother shook her head. "We can't afford to. Things are tight right now. But if you come back and help, we can turn things around. We're not asking you to do this forever, just until we're back on our feet." I let out a bitter laugh. So you want me to drop out of school and work full-time for you for free? That was when my father's patience snapped. You're so selfish, he spat. We've done everything for you. We paid for your education, put food on the table, gave you a roof over your head, and now, when we need you, you turn your back on us? I felt my chest tighten. This isn't turning my back on you. This is me refusing to let you take away everything I've worked for. You're the ones giving me an ultimatum. My father's eyes darkened. If you don't want to be part of this family, that's your choice. But if you walk away, we're done supporting you. No tuition, no rent, no help. You'll be on your own. Silence filled the room. My mother sat there, arms crossed, disappointment written all over her face. And Samantha, smug, untouchable, just stretched and went back to scrolling. I swallowed hard. They weren't giving me a choice. They were just waiting for me to surrender. But I wouldn't. Fine. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to stand. If that's how it is, then I'll figure it out on my own. I turned and walked out the door, feeling my father's cold stare on my back the whole way. My mother didn't call after me. Samantha didn't even look up. It was in that moment I realized, as far as they were concerned, I had never really mattered at all. I don't remember much about the drive to Daniel's apartment. My mind was stuck in a loop, replaying every word my parents had said, every look of disappointment on my mother's face, every ounce of bitterness in my father's voice. The moment I stepped inside, Daniel took one look at me and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked, closing the door behind me. I dropped my bag by the couch and let out a shaky breath. They told me to drop out of college to run the bakery. When I refused, they cut me off. Daniel's eyebrows shot up. What? No tuition, no rent, nothing, I muttered, collapsing onto the couch. They basically disowned me. For a moment, he was silent. Then he shook his head. That's messed up, Nat. I let out a dry laugh. Tell me about it. The weight of what had just happened settled over me like a lead blanket. I had no home to go back to, no financial safety net, and no plan. All I knew was that I wasn't going to give in. Daniel sat beside me, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, you can crash here as long as you need. We'll figure something out. His words, simple as they were, loosened something tight in my chest. At least I wasn't completely alone. The first hits the next morning, I woke up to find that my phone line had been cut off. My parents had canceled my plan overnight, effectively cutting off my ability to call or text. It didn't stop there. When I checked my bank account, I saw that my rent payment had bounced. My mom had always handled the auto pay, and now, without her, I was left scrambling. They didn't just cut me off. They wanted me to feel it. For a second, I wavered. I imagined calling my mom, apologizing, telling her I'd made a mistake. It would be so easy. They'd welcome me back, I'd drop out, and everything would go back to the way it was. Except it wouldn't, because I'd know that my future wasn't mine anymore. With that thought, I forced myself to act. I went out, bought a cheap prepaid phone plan, and made sure my parents couldn't mess with anything else. I updated my financial accounts, transferred what little money I had left into a new card, and cut every last tie they had control over. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but at least I had something that was truly mine. The money problem. The biggest issue was money. My part-time job at a local diner barely covered groceries and textbooks before all this. Now, I had to make it stretch to cover rent, utilities, and everything else. I went straight to my manager and begged for extra shifts. He hesitated at first, but after I explained my situation, he gave me a few more hours. It still wasn't enough, but it was a start. Next, I went to the financial aid office at school. Sitting there, explaining that my parents had cut me off, felt humiliating. But to my surprise, the advisor was understanding. We have emergency scholarships for cases like yours, she said. It won't cover everything, but it'll help. It wasn't a perfect fix, but I took every bit of help I could get. The online attacks, I thought my parents cutting me off would be the worst of it. I was wrong. Since they couldn't reach me by phone, they started blowing up my social media. My dad sent short, angry messages. "You're being selfish. Come back and fix this mess." My moms were guilt-laced. "We did everything for you. How could you do this to your family?" And then there was Samantha. She sent just one message, but it made my blood boil. "You're making your life harder for no reason. You could have just taken the easy way." Easy? She had no idea what struggle was. She had never lifted a finger for the bakery, never worked a real job, never had to fight for anything. And yet, she still got their full support. The worst part? My parents didn't stop at messaging me. They started calling up our relatives, twisting the story to make me look like the villain. A few days later, I got a message from an aunt. "Your father says you abandoned them when they needed you most. You need to go home and do the right thing." I wanted to scream. They weren't telling people the truth. They weren't saying that they were the ones who had pushed me out, that they had chosen Samantha over me at every turn. But I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. They had already made me the bad guy in their story. So I did the only thing I could. I ignored them. The breaking point one night, Daniel and I were sitting in his apartment, eating cheap instant ramen, when he put his chopsticks down and said, "You know, you're doing better than most people would in your shoes." I huffed. "Doesn't feel like it." He gave me a look. "You're still in school. You're working. You're figuring things out. That's more than a lot of people can say." I didn't answer, because part of me didn't believe it. I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. But maybe he was right. Maybe I was surviving. But survival wasn't enough. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I couldn't just keep reacting to what my parents threw at me. I needed a plan. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Cut every unnecessary expense. No takeout, no streaming services, no luxuries. Find another job. Something that pays better. Look into other financial aid options. Ignore my parents. They don't get to control me anymore. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control. I didn't know what the future looked like, but I knew one thing: I was never going back. Surviving on my own wasn't easy, but it was becoming my new normal. I picked up another job at a late-night coffee shop, balancing shifts between the diner and the cafe while keeping up with classes. My schedule was brutal, but I refused to give up. I had worked too hard to let my parents take everything away from me. Then, about 3 weeks after I left home, I started hearing whispers about the bakery. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured my parents were struggling a little without me there to help, but I assumed they'd adjust. But then Ethan, one of my friends from town, dropped a bombshell. "Hey, Nat, have you heard what's going on with the bakery?" he asked one night while we were sitting in the cafe. I shrugged. "No, haven't really been keeping up." Ethan hesitated. "Well, it's bad. Really bad." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "They're barely keeping up. The shelves are half empty, and people are starting to notice. Customers are complaining that the pastries aren't as fresh, and your dad's been snapping at people. The whole place feels off." I stared at him, processing his words. "They're struggling that much." Ethan nodded. "It gets worse. Chloe, one of the regulars, told me there was a notice posted on the door last week. Some kind of overdue payment." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Overdue payment? This wasn't just about me leaving. Something else was going on. The discovery that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bakery. No matter how much I told myself that it wasn't my problem anymore, a part of me still felt connected to it. I had spent years working there, after all. So, against my better judgment, I started digging. I didn't want to contact my parents. There was no way I was opening that door again. Instead, I reached out to an old coworker who had quit the bakery months ago. "Do you know if my parents took out any loans for the bakery?" I texted. She replied almost immediately. "Yeah, a big one. Your dad took it out last year. Something about expanding, but he never did. No one knew where the money actually went." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. "They took out a huge loan, but didn't use it for the bakery?" My hands shook as I typed my next message. Did they ever mention Samantha? This time, there was a long pause before the reply came. I mean, yeah. Your dad kept talking about how she had a big future and how she just needed the right opportunity. And suddenly, everything clicked. The real reason. They wanted me back. It wasn't just about the bakery. It was about Samantha. They had taken out a massive loan not to improve the bakery, but to fund some ridiculous plan for her. I didn't know exactly what it was yet, but I could guess. My parents had always believed in Samantha's so-called potential, no matter how little she actually did. If she told them she wanted to start a business or chase some grand idea, they would have thrown everything they had into it. And now, it was backfiring. Confronting the truth. The next morning, I met up with Ethan again. I need to find out what that loan was for, I told him. He hesitated. Are you sure? Do you really want to get involved? I just need to know, I said, my voice firm. I need to hear it for myself. Ethan sighed but nodded. I'll see what I can find. Later that evening, he sent me a photo of an official-looking document. It was a loan agreement, taken out in my father's name, with the bakery listed as collateral. But it wasn't for bakery expenses. It was for a new business venture under Samantha's name. Betrayal runs deep. I gripped my phone, my blood boiling. My parents had risked everything for Samantha, and now that things were falling apart, they expected me to clean up the mess. That was why they had been so desperate for me to come back. It had never been about family. It had never been about the bakery. It was about saving Samantha from facing the consequences of her own failures. That night, my mom called me from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Natalie, she said, her voice tired. We need you to come home. I clenched my jaw. Why? Because the bakery is failing? Because Samantha's big opportunity didn't work out? She went silent for a moment. It's not like that. Then tell me what it is like. I shot back. Tell me why you took out a loan in her name. Tell me why you gambled the bakery on her dream. Another pause. Then a quiet, broken, we thought it would work. I let out a bitter laugh. And now that it hasn't, you expect me to fix it. We're your family, Natalie, she pleaded. Family helps each other. I took a slow breath. No, family doesn't throw away one child's future for another. Family doesn't treat one kid like a servant and the other like royalty. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. And with that, I hung up. I expected to feel guilty. I didn't. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The moment I hung up, I sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for the guilt to creep in. It never did. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a line my parents couldn't cross. And I wasn't backing down. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. My parents didn't call again, didn't try to reach me. But I knew better than to think they'd just let things go. They weren't the type to admit they were wrong. If I wasn't useful to them anymore, they'd find another way to twist the story. And they did. The fallout begins. I woke up one morning to a flood of notifications. My stomach turned as I saw my family's last name trending on a local town group. I clicked on a post from my aunt. It's so heartbreaking to see parents give everything to a child, only for that child to abandon them in their time of need. Some people forget where they came from. Underneath were dozens of comments, most of them supporting her. Disgusting. Kids these days have no loyalty. She thinks she's too good for her own family? I heard she just ran off and left them struggling. I gritted my teeth. Of course they made me the villain. My mom had probably called up the whole extended family, feeding them a version of the story that made her and my dad look like the victims. No mention of Samantha. No mention of the loan. No mention of the fact that they were the ones who cut me off. It was infuriating. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell the truth, but I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. It didn't matter what they said. They couldn't control me anymore. Samantha's meltdown. That afternoon, Samantha finally texted me. You seriously need to come back. You don't understand what you've done. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. What I had done? I typed back. I didn't take out a loan in my name and fail. That was you." A minute later, she replied, "It's not my fault. Mom and Dad said they'd help me. They believed in me." I laughed out loud. She really thought that was an excuse? And when things fell apart, they expected me to clean up your mess. I wrote back, "Well, not this time." She read it immediately but didn't respond. I guess she finally realized I wasn't going to save her. The bakery's collapse, a week passed. Then another. Ethan kept me updated. The bakery was barely staying afloat. Customers had lost trust in it. Business was slower than ever, and word had gotten out about their money problems. Then, one evening, he sent me a photo. It was a foreclosure notice taped to the bakery's front door. I stared at it for a long time, emotions twisting inside me. The bakery had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember, and now it was over. But even then, I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for my parents. They had done this to themselves. I had worked in that bakery for years, holding it together while they put all their faith in Samantha. And when she failed, they had expected me to throw my future away to fix it. They had taken me for granted. And now, they were paying the price. The final goodbye. I thought about driving by the bakery one last time, just to see it. But I stopped myself. That place wasn't my responsibility anymore. It never really was. Instead, I focused on my own life. With the extra shifts at the coffee shop, I managed to stabilize my finances. My emergency scholarship helped with tuition. I wasn't thriving yet, but I was getting there. Daniel was right, I was doing better than most people would in my situation. One day, as I was walking out of class, I got another call from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even picked up. My father's voice was low, angry. "This is your last chance, Natalie. We can fix this, but you need to come home." I exhaled, steadying myself. "There's nothing to fix," he scoffed. "Don't be stupid. We're family." "No, we're not." The words came out colder than I expected, but they felt right. "You made that clear when you tried to control my life. I don't owe you anything." A long pause. Then finally his voice hardened. "Fine. Don't bother coming back." I smiled. I wasn't planning to. I hung up, blocked the number. And just like that, I was free. Moving forward a few weeks later, Ethan sent me another update. My parents had moved out of town. The bakery was gone. And Samantha, no one really knew. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. I had built something that was mine. I had proven to myself that I didn't need them, and that was all that mattered. Story 2, I guess I always knew it would end like this. Not in some dramatic, screaming showdown, but in a quiet, tired kind of realization, the kind that settles in your bones and tells you, this is it. I'm Elle, 26 years old, and until recently, I lived with my parents and 2 younger siblings, Mark and Olivia. I say lived because, well, that part of my life is officially over. Growing up, I thought love was supposed to be unconditional, that if you worked hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, eventually, the people you loved would do the same for you. Turns out, that was just another lie I told myself to keep going. For years, I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who picked up the slack, held things together, and made sure everyone else was okay. My dad worked, but I did 2 long hours, double shifts, anything to make sure the bills got paid. My mom? She stayed home, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She called herself too tired to work, though somehow she had the energy to binge-watch reality shows and keep the snack cabinet stocked with her favorite junk food. And my siblings? Mark couldn't keep a job to save his life, something about bad management every single time he got fired. Though the missing cash at his last 3 workplaces told a different story. Olivia, meanwhile, insisted she wanted to work, but was struggling with her mental health, which, fair enough until you realize that her idea of coping involved endless shopping sprees and late-night parties with friends, who never seemed to have real jobs either. So guess who carried the weight of it all? Yeah, for the longest time, I told myself it was temporary. That once Mark and Olivia got their lives together, things would get better, but they never did. And somehow, the more I gave, the more they expected. I kept my head down. I paid the bills. I cleaned up after everyone. And when birthdays rolled around, I even pitched in for their gifts, extravagant, expensive gifts they absolutely did not deserve. And then came my birthday. There was no party, no surprise, no effort, just a plastic bag shoved into my hands with a $5 bottle of body wash inside. Body wash. That was it. Not even a card, not even a cake. I stared at it, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. Just my dad sighing like I was the problem, and my mom acting like she had no idea why I looked so hurt. Olivia barely acknowledged me, already on her way out to another night with her friends. Mark? He smirked and muttered something about how I should be grateful, and something inside me just snapped. I don't even remember half of what I said. All I know is that for the first time in my life, I let them have it. Years of resentment, exhaustion, frustration, I let it all out. I asked why Mark got a brand new gaming console while I got this. I asked why Olivia got a luxury spa day while I got this. I asked why, after everything I'd done for them, this was all I was worth. My dad called me ungrateful. My mom started crying. Mark rolled his eyes. Olivia didn't even look up from her phone, and that's when I knew. They were never going to change. No matter how much I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be the one expected to give more, to do more, to be more while they did nothing. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. I was done. It was time to leave. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over again in my head. The fake surprise on my mom's face, the way my dad sighed like I was the disappointment, the look on Mark's face when he called me ungrateful, like I was supposed to just accept it, like it was my duty to be okay with less. But I wasn't okay, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to pretend that I was. The next morning, I went about my usual routine. Got up early, cleaned the kitchen, made coffee. Same as always. Only this time, I wasn't doing it for them. This time, I was paying attention. I was watching, because I had a plan. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I knew if I did, they'd find a way to stop me. They'd guilt trip me, manipulate me, remind me of all the times they needed me. My mom would start crying. My dad would get angry. Olivia would throw a tantrum. Mark would smirk and say something that would make me doubt myself. Not this time. This time, I was getting out. Step 1. The money. The first thing I did was cut back on what I was giving them, slowly, so they wouldn't notice right away. I stopped covering extra groceries. If my mom wanted snacks, she could figure it out. I stopped handing out cash whenever Mark needed to borrow money. I let Olivia deal with her own reckless spending habits. Every dollar I saved went into a separate account. Not a huge amount at first, but it added up fast. Next, I picked up more shifts. If I was going to leave, I needed enough for rent, deposits, furniture, everything. So I worked. Long hours, extra shifts, took on some freelance work on the side. It was exhausting, but for the first time, I wasn't working just to survive. I was working for me. Step 2. The apartment finding a place wasn't easy. Everything was too expensive, too far, or required proof of income for months in advance. But I kept looking. Then one day I found it. A tiny one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. Nothing fancy, barely enough space for a bed and a couch. But it was clean, it was safe, and most importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease without telling anyone. The second I had those keys in my hand, it felt real. I had an out. I had a way out. Step 3. The goodbye. They didn't see coming. I waited until the last possible moment to tell them. Not out of respect, not out of guilt, but because I knew they'd try to stop me. It was a Sunday afternoon. My dad was watching TV. My mom was scrolling on her phone. Mark and Olivia weren't even home. Perfect timing. I'm moving out, I said. Just like that. No build-up, no sugarcoating. My mom looked up first, blinking like she'd misheard me. What? I found an apartment. I'm leaving this week. Silence. Then my dad laughed. Actually laughed, like it was a joke. You? Move out? You can't afford that. I can, I said. I already signed the lease. His smile faded. So you're just leaving? After everything we've done for you? Everything they had done for me? I almost laughed. Instead, I said, yeah, I am. My mom started crying. I can't believe you do this to us. After all we've been through as a family. I've been through it, I corrected her. You've been sitting on the couch. She gasped like I had slapped her. My dad's face turned red. Don't talk to your mother like that. Why not? I shrugged. It's the truth. They weren't used to this version of me. The version that wasn't bending over backward to make them comfortable. The version that wasn't afraid to put myself first. You won't last a month, my dad snapped. Maybe not, I said. But I'd rather struggle on my own than keep living like this. And with that, I went upstairs and started packing. They didn't help. They didn't even offer. So I called a couple of friends from work, Lisa and Janet. They showed up that weekend, helped me load my stuff into a car, and just like that, I was gone. Step 4. The first night of freedom, when I walked into my apartment, I didn't even unpack. I just laid down on the floor, staring at the ceiling. It was quiet, no one yelling my name, no one asking me for money, no one complaining that I wasn't doing enough, just me. For the first time in my life, just me. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. The first month in my apartment felt unreal. At first, I kept expecting someone to call me, demanding I come back, or for my dad to show up, telling me I was being ridiculous, or maybe for my mom to leave 100 guilt trip messages about how I was breaking the family apart, but they didn't. For the first time in years, the silence belonged to me. I started coming home to a place that was actually mine. No dirty dishes waiting for me. No mess I didn't make. No one calling my name every time something needed to be done. It was peaceful. Strange, but peaceful. I spent my evenings however I wanted. Sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting in bed, enjoying the fact that no one was pulling me in 1,000 directions. I even started seeing someone a guy Lisa introduced me to. I wouldn't call it serious, but it was nice to have a life that wasn't just about survival. I finally felt like I was moving forward. And then the calls started. The first call, the setup, it was my mom. At first I thought maybe, just maybe, she was calling to check in. Maybe she realized she missed me. Maybe she wanted to apologize. But the first thing she said was, "Where's the check?" I blinked. "What check? You know what check?" she said, like I was the one being unreasonable. "The money for the bills." I let out a slow breath. "Mom, I don't live there anymore." She sighed, like I was just too dumb to understand. "Elle, we're struggling. We can't pay everything without your help." That's not my problem. The silence on the other end told me she wasn't expecting that. "You can't be serious," she said after a moment. "How do you expect us to manage?" I shrugged, even though she couldn't see it. "You have 2 other kids. They can help," she scoffed. "You know Mark is going through a tough time. And Olivia is lazy," I interrupted. "And Mark, he's a thief, Mom. You know that. Maybe it's time they pull their own weight." I don't think I had ever spoken to her like that before. She gasped. "How can you be so heartless? They're your siblings, and I'm your daughter," I said. "But that never stopped you from treating me like an ATM." I hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. The second call, the demand. The next day my dad called. "You need to come home," he said. Not should, not please need. Like I was still a kid who had to listen. "I am home," I said. He exhaled sharply. "Elle, you know we can't do this without you. Just come back, at least until we figure things out." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, no." He sounded genuinely shocked. "No," I repeated. I'm done. You're being selfish, he snapped. You think life is just about you now? Yeah, I said. For once it is. I hung up again. The breaking point. They left me alone for a while after that. Probably thought I'd change my mind. I didn't. Then, 2 weeks later, they showed up at my apartment. It was a Friday night. I had a few friends over, Lisa, Janet, and a couple of others. We were having a quiet night, some wine, some music. I was actually happy. Then came the loud knocking. It didn't stop. Lisa gave me a look. Who the hell is that? I already knew. I opened the door. My dad, Mark, and Olivia were standing outside, arguing with my building manager. My dad was saying something about family rights. Mark looked pissed. Olivia was looking around, taking in everything, like she was entitled to it. What are you doing here? I asked, crossing my arms. My dad frowned. We need to talk. I gestured at the time. It's 10 at night. Mark rolled his eyes. So what? We're family. No, I said. We're not. That got their attention. My dad's jaw tightened. Don't say that. I'll say whatever I want. You're not my family. You used me. You let me work myself into exhaustion while you did nothing. And now that I've left, everything is falling apart? That's not my fault. That's yours. Olivia scoffed, stepping inside like she belonged there. You're living large over here. Why not let me stay with you? I laughed. Actually laughed. She looked offended. I shook my head. You think I'd let you move in? You don't clean. You don't work. You don't do anything. I'm not going from taking care of all of you to taking care of you alone. Mark muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care enough to ask what. Now, get out, I said. My dad shook his head. We're not leaving until you help us. That's when Mark lost it. He started yelling, pushing past me, knocking things over. Olivia joined in, whining about how unfair I was. My dad just stood there, acting like he deserved to be here, like I was the problem. They were treating my home the way they treated theirs, like it was mine to clean up, mine to fix, mine to fund. I felt my hands shaking. I wanted to scream. Then I saw Lisa slip away. She came back a few minutes later with security. They had my dad and Mark escorted out. Olivia shrieked, but when security told her she could leave or get arrested, she left too. I shut the door, and I locked it. The last goodbye, that was the last time I saw them. The next day, I changed my number, blocked them all. I pressed charges for the damage Mark did. He and my dad got fined. They never paid it. A few months later, I heard Mark got arrested for stealing again. Olivia got caught up with the wrong crowd. My dad's hours got cut. My mom, well, she never changed. Their house, the one I worked so hard to keep running, ended up a mess. They let it fall apart. They never even tried to fix it. And me? I moved forward. I furnished my apartment, went on trips, made friends, built a life that was mine. And for the first time in my life, I was happy. I should have done it years ago.